Okay, then we have about 15 minutes for question and answer. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and you can speak in Korean, then they will translate into English. Okay.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 한성대학교의 김혜련입니다. 저는 말레이 대학교의 리컨유 교수님께 좀 질문을 드리고 싶은데요. 네, 저 몇 년 전에 말레이시아를 방문을 해서 현지 조사를 한 경험이 있습니다. 말레이시아는 잘 아시다시피 아시아에서도 영광로라고 불릴 정도로 굉장히 다양한 종족과 문화가 공존하고 있는데, 자, 그렇다면 민족 관계에는 현재 어떻게 조성이 되어 있는지 이 부분에 대해서 좀 여쭤보고 싶습니다. 기존에는 말레이계와 중국계의 충돌이 1969년에 있는 것으로 알고 있는데요. 기존에는 시행경제정책을 추진을 함으로써 부미부트라를 우대하는 이러한 정책을 추진을 했습니다. 하지만 현재는 사투 말레이시아라고 해서 하나의 말레이시아를 강조하고 있는데, 그러면 현재 말레이계와 중국계의 관계는 어떠한지 여기에 대해서 질문을 드리고 싶습니다. 감사합니다.
Okay, Professor Yu, did you understand the question? Professor Yu?
李教授你好。教授你好，我是来自韩国汉城大学的金惠莲，然后我想请教您两个问题。一个是马来族和华族的一个民族关系。对，因为我知道1969年的时候呢，华族和马来族有一个种族冲突，但是现在呢，马来西亚政府强调的是一个民族的和谐。那现在马来族和华人之间的族群关系是怎么样的呢？
Okay, please, you should open the mic.
您的话筒现在是闭着的，对。
OK， 我想问你要我回答用中文还是要用这个英文？
您随意，如果是您是用中文回答的话，我可以翻译。
OK， I think better I'm speak in English. Okay， 可以吗？好 ，OK， I think better I'm speak in English. Okay, for your information, I can answer your questions. Okay, just now you mentioned about that is a riot. Okay, riot during our May 13, 1969. Okay, due to this riot, our government has implemented new economic policy that I just mentioned in my previous slide in order to restructuring the income imbalance between Chinese and Malays. Then you can see that most of the Malay, okay, during that time were staying in the rural area. Okay, from this kind of the policy, the new economic policy, we will encourage the Malays to move away from the rural area and then to stay in the urban in order to cooperate with Chinese merchants, or in order to cooperate with all those elite peoples in our own country. Because you can see during Mahathir administration, okay, our former prime minister always mentioned that in the multiracial society like Malaysia, it is always a problem. You see, not only Malaysia, this happened in Indonesia. Okay, currently I have one published paper in Southeast Asia research. We're talking about cultural adaptability and political changes. How this kind of the small Chinese family business, actually they are going to survive in the political changes, such as new economic policy and the new order baru that implemented by Indonesian government. You see, I'm quite lucky to stay in Malaysia. After I done the research in Indonesia, I found out I still have my own Chinese name. I can have my own cultural identity, and then I know my surname, and then I know my ancestor clan. Whereby in Indonesia, in the society, they can't own their Chinese name. 因为我们是华人，我们不能够拥有我们自己的华族的名字。Okay, we can't own our Chinese name. We have two names, and then during the Soeharto, I think most of the members of the floor also know that during the Suharto administrations, most of the Chinese culture have been eliminated. So compared in the Malaysian scenario, actually the new economic policy, that is a good point to restructure the income balance. But however, okay, during this time of the political scandals, I'm not sure whether you all understand about our Malaysian recent scenario from the political scandals. We have noticed that some of the politicians have misused it. Okay, misuse it, our Malaysia's preferential Bumiputra preferential policy in order to get the project, okay, to get the project by the government without doing anything. Okay, this kind of the behavior in the economic context we consider is a rent-seeking behavior. 寻租的这个经济观念。You have the funds, okay, you have the funds, you have the research, for example, the research fund or whatever, okay, from the government. Most probably, they will assign it to the Bumiputra, okay, to assign it to a Bumiputra. Because as I mentioned earlier, most of the native in Malaysia, they work in the government sector. They work in the government sector, they tend to get the mega project from the government. But in the future, I think Malaysia should implement the more affirmative actions. So affirmative action in the sense that we need to form a healthy business environment regardless all the reasons. Okay, in the future, maybe we don't, okay, I'm a Chinese, I own the business. We no need to differentiate about Chinese business, Indian business, or Malay business. We are the Malaysian business. If you maintain the healthy business environment, I think this kind of the ethnic tension or the unhealthy ethnic relationship will be enhanced in the future. Because you see our identity card, we also didn't mention I'm the Chinese, but I own the Chinese name. But I'm a Warga Negara Malaysia. I'm a Malaysian citizen. So that is a good point. If you apply the equal way in doing business and in the education, I think I can see the future of the booming of Malaysian families in a globalized context. So I hope I can answer your questions.
김 교수님, 간단하게 우리 오디언스를 위해서 지금 답변하신 내용을 간략하게 좀 요약을 해주실 수 있을까요?
한국어로.
네.
저 말레이 대학교 교수님, 리콘유 교수님 답변을 굉장히 잘 해주셨는데요. 그만큼 말레이시아는 다양한 종족 갈등이 존재하고 있는 이런 상황이다라고 말씀을 하셨습니다. 자, 비록 말레이계, 중국계, 인도계가 공존하고 있는 다인종 다문화 국가이지만 기존에는 부미부트라 정책을 통해서 신경제 정책을 통해서 말레이계를 우대하는 정책을 추진했는데 이 종족 관계가 여전히 완화되지 않고 여러 가지 종족 갈등이 나타나고 있다라고 말씀을 해주셨습니다. 그래서 향후에는 좀 더 건전한 종족 관계를 위해서는 좀 더 적극적인 정책을 추진해야 된다라고 말씀을 해주신 것 같습니다. 감사합니다.
네, 오케이, 네. 뭐 이게 truly international conference. We hear Korean, Chinese, and English simultaneously. Okay, we'll listen to the second question. Yep. 안 되는데.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question. Thank you so much for Professor Yoon and then all the three presenters. I have been in touch with you guys all, and then I have a question for Mina, and thank you so much for your great presentation. And then there are so many questions that I want to ask about. We have a very limited time slot, so I have just one question. Just kind of, I thought kind of, does these Filipina domestic workers' gender make their way of consumption kind of look more conspicuous than their opposite sex? Yeah, their opposite sex. Well, I myself as a historian of immigration, particularly in case of Asian male workers during the Asian exclusion era in the U.S. And so, yeah, there were so many Chinese merchants and who started their immigrant experience as a laborer, and then they somehow can manage it to be successful, and then they returned home wearing some kind of gold watches and claiming that they were living in Gold Mountain, and they built their houses, the big houses in their hometown. And I think these Filipino domestic workers, they are just doing the same, the way that their male counterparts did. You still do, but why researchers only focus on the activity of these female workers instead of yeah, I think usually men I think there's kind of blind spot of kind of gendered blind spot in the study of consumption. It's kind of they focus too much on kind of women's behavior, consumption behavior, rather than male behavior. That's the kind of question that I want to ask. Yeah.
Okay, can I add one more question to Mina?
Oh yeah, if it's related one, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your quite interesting presentation. I really enjoyed. And as an observer, I think for you, it was maybe it was quite obvious to find some cleavage between their consumption style and their working condition. But I just wonder how those domestic workers themselves really express their feelings or ideas about their consumption, how it can be accepted in local society or just by themselves. So whether they have any recognition about this kind of cleavage between their working condition and consumption style.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. It's much appreciated. The first question was a gender question. Since I usually write about women, gender is terrain. I appreciate that. Why is it that it's women? And it's usually true if you look at consumption histories. I think the biggest anthology published in the 1990s was Consumption, Thy Name is Women. Like, you know, it's usually now. But you're right. It's not just women who do this, but because I was looking at Filipino domestic workers in Italy who are mostly female, and women in the Philippines hold the purse strings, so they're the ones in charge of spending money. And so the house, although the men have some influence, it's really the women that sort of take charge. But you can see the photo of the bar and the alcohol. That was her husband, who obviously wanted to show that alcohol is connected to males rather than females in the Philippines, since most women do not drink alcohol, except, as you can see, they're now developing a taste for spritz. Now, I did a published paper, so I'm happy to send it to you if you send an email, on Filipino male. In the 1920s, the people who migrated from the Philippines were men, and they migrated to California and Hawaii. And I've written a publication published in 2016 on dress. They dressed up like Hollywood stars in order to break the color line in the US, and they succeeded. And sometimes, you know, they wouldn't accept you because there was a sign that said positively no dogs and Filipinos allowed, but they dressed up like, you know, Clark Gable and the 20s, which was the era of the dandy. So men also do that in a time when they were all men. But it's just that there were mostly Filipino women. The domestic workers in Italy were mostly women, and that's why you've got that the women are in charge of the purse strings and the spending. But thank you for pointing that out, because maybe I should check out the men too. And it's because my project at the moment where I got a grant from was on women, so that's why I focused on women. But the men also certainly do that, and I like your study about the watches, because that's definitely an Asian not just a Southeast Asia, but as an Asian thing for men, showing off through watches. The other question about how the domestic workers' ideas and how they're accepted, they don't talk about their work, and when they do, it's very sad. So that the nurse that I interviewed I was almost in tears, and she was explaining that she had to de-skill as a domestic worker when she's actually a nurse. And when her employer found out she was a nurse in the Philippines and wanted her to give injections to the elderly person she was caring for, she said she can't because she doesn't have the Italian qualifications and she'll be in trouble with the law. And so she was saying, so it's not something they talk about. They talk about their credentials, and of course my questions were about their spending, what they did in the spending practice, so the focus on that. But even in their Facebook posts, I don't see them talking about the work. So it's not something that if you were most of these domestic workers have college degrees, right? So it's not something they're going to want to talk about really. And they don't say that to their families because the traditional culture is to not talk about conflict. And so a lot of them are, for example, I talked about the successful ones, but there's also some that are in huge debt because they're trying to go to the Philippines and pretend that they're successful and they owe a lot of money in the end. And also you're right, they're different. It depends on where you are. So if you're a Filipino domestic worker in Singapore, you can never get citizenship. But the workers there actually do courses. They try and do courses to upgrade theirs so that they can move out of domestic work or something. As it's a different sort of scenario. But the Singapore case works very well with Professor Kim Ji-yoon's presentation about ethnic enclaves, because over there they managed to have a mall, Lucky Plaza, catered to actually Filipino domestic workers' tastes, which is quite interesting in that sense. So I hope I answered their questions. Thank you.
네. 아니 저쪽 그래, okay. After her, then you ask a question.
Yeah, my name is Hye-sung and my question addresses to Professor Mina Roche. And thank you for your presentation. I've learned a lot about Filipino domestic workers in Italy. After performing in-depth 23 cases of interview, you argue that the way they express their new identities as Europeanized Filipinos. I think this is a good example of transnational migration studies. And I have very basic and primary question. I just wonder, what is your position or opinion on their behavior when they return to Philippines? In my opinion, Filipino domestic workers in Italy have made quite positive contribution to Philippines economy, and they are also leading, in some sense, cultural fusion. So like drinking Sprite and coming of age parties. So isn't there any contribution aspects of their extravagant behavior? And I wonder your opinion about that.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question, because my book that's published this year, which is not just on Filipino domestic workers in Italy, but the world, there's a section on philanthropy, diasporic philanthropy. So this, I should have had a picture of it, but these same Filipinos in Padova and Barcelona, they send remittances to build a town hall. So that's another, build a town hall for the barangay, for the little village. They donate money for every time there's a typhoon. So they're philanthropists. So I wanted to see, when I wrote that book, I wanted to see migrants outside the frame of just laborers or disenfranchised laborers. They're also philanthropists. There's also investors. So these, as you rightly said, they send. So the one with a lovely cake, I couldn't get over that picture. I had to show it. It was a classic, you know, with the different cakes. She actually owns several apartments in the Philippines, which she rents out. There's one family of 4 sisters that send 50 euros a month to their family. So remittances are big. They give donations. There's also activism on behalf of migrants that they support there. And so I think you're right. The argument I made in that book was the Filipino migrants are actually agents of change. They're not victims or survivors. And they change the country, as you rightly said, through consumption. Not just the government says, oh, thank you for your remittances, but that's just the money. But actually, it's a more profound change than that. Each person comes back as, you know, Filipino migrant 2.0 because they change themselves. Some of the domestic workers in Singapore, for example, become joined the NGOs in Singapore, Humanitarian Organization of Migrant Economics, and they present the papers at Geneva, which they never would have done if they were in the Philippines, right? And I've got the French woman who took my employer to court for the modern slavery and now works for the French Union. So I think you're right. The migrants are not just workers; they've reinvented themselves, and they've had more than the impact on the country is massive. Not just on the money, but they transform one town at a time. There are also migrants who send medical missions, not the domestic workers, the more professional ones. And so they give free health care to every town in the Philippines, doing the job of politicians. And you might be interested to know that the mayor of one of the towns where the Italian villas are, when he campaigned for office, he went to Italy to campaign. I didn't want to talk about politics, I didn't know much, but I find it fascinating that the politician is going to campaign in Italy to win in his province in the Philippines. So it's also transformed politics. Thank you.
Okay.
중앙대 박철승 교수인데요. 저는 이근유 교수님한테 묻고 싶습니다. 1997년에 아시아의 IMF가 그 위기가 닥쳤을 때 모든 방콕이나 태국이나 인도네시아나 한국은 IMF의 권유를 100% 따랐어요. 그런데 그 당시 말레이시아의 마하트리 총리가 뭐라고 그러냐면 아시아는 아시아의 방법대로 가야 한다고 그래가지고 유일하게 마하트리 그 총리가 IMF의 그런 경제적인 권고를 거부를 해가지고 다른 나라는 IMF 동남아의 한국이나 태국이나 인도네시아는 엄청나게 어려움을 10여 년 동안 겪었는데 그때 말레이시아는 그 당시에 테이크오버를 해가지고 아시아에 굉장히 중진국으로 그렇게 올라가서 다시 저는 마하트리 총리의 그 위대한 정치력을 굉장히 높이 평가해가지고 한국의 IMF에 관한 것을 마하트리 총리에 따라야 한다 그런 논문을 한국 위기에 발표를 했었어요. 그런데 최근에 10년이 지나고 나서 마하트리 총리가 끝나고 나서 부패가 일어난다고 그래가지고 다시 마하트리 총리가 나와가지고 총리를 하고 나서 그 이후에 기업 경영이나 이런 것에 대해서는 마하트리 총리가 있을 때하고 마하트리 총리 이후에 있을 때하고 기업 경영에 관련되어 있는 것들은 어떻게 다른 것이 무엇인지 그걸 좀 알고 싶고 또 김지우 선생님한테는 하나 질문하니 우리나라의 동대문이나 이태원이나 또 이런 여러 나라들 사례를 얘기했는데 우리나라도 미국에 가면은 로스앤젤레스에 봐보면은 코리안 타운이나 차이니스 타운이나 이런 것이 있을 수 있거든요. 외국에 있는 그것과 우리나라에 있는 것과 비교를 해가지고 하면 더 좋은 논문이 되지 않을까 하는데 어떻게 생각하시는지요?
Okay, he raised two questions, but the first question is not directly related to the theme of this conference, but the second question is relevant. So Professor Dr. Kim, will you answer that question in briefly?
Yes, as I told you, it's just preliminary phase of this research. Yeah, so maybe I can explore more possibilities. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so we are now at the end of this session. The title of this international conference is Humanities of Migration. I'm sorry. Okay, so you can ask a question in other way. Okay, so the title of our session is how we can conceptualize and understand the migration from humanities point of view. One thing that came to my mind is the importance of culture. So in the case of Filipino domestic workers' consumption style, I think it is strongly influenced by the westernized culture in the Philippines. Okay? That kind of extravagant, conspicuous consumption style is quite different from that of East Asian style that emphasizes savings and emphasis for long-term goal of economic mobility. So, culture in different countries and parts of the world shape people's minds and their behaviors. So in that way, the three papers are quite related to the main theme of this conference. Okay, so thank you for the excellent presentation of the three speakers and active participation from the audience. So we'll conclude this session. Thank you.